The gate pad blinked red. Access denied. I tried the code again. 1988. My birth year. Red again. My phone buzzed in my hand, vibrating with the answer before I even asked the question. A new Instagram post from my mother, Jennifer. #summer reset. There they were, my parents, Jessica, and Chloe raising champagne flutes on a private deck somewhere in the Mediterranean. Then came the text. House is alarmed. Stay at the library or a friend's. See you in August. I stood in the humid driveway with $12 in my pocket and realized I wasn't just left behind. I was locked out. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The heat radiating off the blacktop was the only warm thing about my home. I dragged my suitcase to the shade of the brick pillar and sat down, staring at the iron gate that stood between me and my toothbrush. Most people would have panicked. Most 13-year-old girls would have called the police or sobbed until a neighbor came out. I didn't. I just sat there and let the silence settle, dissecting the moment like a biology specimen. There is a term for children like me. Sociologists call it the glass child. Usually, it refers to the healthy sibling of a sick child, the one parents look right through to tend to the one who needs them. But in the mountain household, the dynamic was different. I wasn't looked through because my sisters were sick. I was looked through because they were golden. Jessica was the beauty queen, the one my mother, Jennifer, groomed for pageants and socialite debuts before she could walk. Chloe was the prodigy, the violin virtuoso my father, Jason, showed off at dinner parties like a trophy. And me? I was Ashley, the administrative error, the variable that didn't fit the equation. For years, I thought I was doing something wrong. I thought if I got better grades, or kept my room cleaner, or smiled brighter, the glass would turn into a mirror and they would finally see me. But looking at that closed gate, the truth finally clicked into place. It wasn't about what I did. It was about who they were. My parents were narcissists of the highest order. They didn't have children. They had extensions of their own egos. Jessica reflected their vanity. Chloe reflected their intellect. I reflected nothing but their obligation. I remembered my 10th birthday. I had come downstairs excited for pancakes, only to find the kitchen empty and a note saying they had taken the girls to a casting call in the city. They didn't come back until after dark. When they walked in, my mother looked at me, surprised, as if she hadn't expected to find me still existing in her living room. "Oh," she had said, "there's leftover thai in the fridge. No cake, no candles, just cold pad thai," and the crushing realization that my existence was an inconvenience to their schedule. My father was worse. He was an architect, obsessed with clean lines and perfect facades. He used to look at me across the dinner table like I was a smudge on one of his renderings, a flaw that needed to be erased to preserve the aesthetic. He never hit me. He never yelled. He just edited me out. If we took a family photo, I was the one holding the camera. If they went to a gala, I was the one watching the house. I was the staff they didn't have to pay. That text message wasn't an accident. They didn't forget I was coming. They didn't mix up the dates. This was a calculated administrative decision. They wanted a perfect, photogenic European summer, and I didn't fit the brand. The alarm code change was the final edit. They had simply deleted the file named Ashley to free up storage space for their happiness. My hands lay in my lap, steady as stone. The tears I expected didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It was the weight of clarity. They hadn't just left me behind. They had discarded me. And if I was trash to them, I wouldn't wait by the curb for the garbage truck. I stood up, dusted off my jeans, and looked down the long, empty road. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't staying here to be erased. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes after the text, a car turned onto the street. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't the police. It was a matte black sedan that looked less like a vehicle and more like a weapon on wheels. The window rolled down, and I found myself looking at the one person my parents hated almost as much as they loved their own reflections. My Uncle Robert, To the rest of the family, Robert was the vulture, a ruthless venture capitalist who had made millions by stripping failing companies for parts. He hadn't spoken to my father, Jason, in a decade, yet here he was, idling at the curb of the house I was locked out of. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer a sympathetic smile. He just unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," he said. His voice was like grinding gravel. "Your mother posted the itinerary online." I figured the math didn't add up. I climbed in. The car smelled like expensive leather and zero tolerance. I buckled my seatbelt, bracing for the questions. Why did they leave you? How could they? But Robert remained silent. He drove with surgical precision, navigating the winding roads away from the suburbs and toward the city skyline. It wasn't a rescue mission. It felt like an acquisition. Finally, he spoke. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the road. "They didn't forget you, Ashley. Don't insult your own intelligence by pretending this was an accident." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They liquidated their investment in you. You were a non-performing asset in their portfolio of perfection. So, they cut their losses." It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. It was also the first honest thing I'd heard in 13 years. Tears felt inefficient. I simply nodded. We pulled up to his estate. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress. Brutalist architecture, all raw concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass, perched on a cliff edge like it was daring gravity to challenge it. Inside, it was cold, quiet, and immaculate. There were no family photos, no clutter, just space. He sat me down at a dining table made of a single slab of black marble. A housekeeper placed a plate in front of me. Filet mignon, seared perfectly. No kids' menu. No pity pasta. He poured himself a glass of dark red wine and poured me a glass of sparkling water. "Eat," he commanded. I cut into the steak. It was the best thing I had ever tasted, mostly because it didn't taste like leftovers. It tasted like a standard being set. Robert watched me eat for a moment, then leaned forward. "Here is the deal. I don't do charity. I don't do babysitting. If you stay here, you are not my niece. You are my protégé. I will feed you, clothe you, and educate you. In return, you will stop acting like a victim. You will learn the difference between value and price. You will learn that tears are a waste of hydration unless they move the needle in your favor." He took a sip of his wine. "No pity, no drama, only equity. Do we have an agreement?" I looked at this terrifying man, this vulture who feasted on the dead. I realized he was the only person offering me life. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, looked him in the eye, and spoke the first words of my new life. Deal. The next 15 years weren't a childhood. They were an extended audit. While my peers were worrying about prom dates and college applications, I was learning how to read a balance sheet before I could legally drive. Robert didn't believe in allowances. He believed in compensation. If I maintained a 4.0 GPA, I received a stipend. If I managed the household inventory efficiently, I received a bonus. If I failed, I received a lecture on opportunity cost. It sounds cold. To an outsider, it probably looked abusive. But for a girl who had been treated like invisible furniture her whole life, being held to a standard felt like love. It meant I mattered. It meant my actions had weight. Every Sunday morning, we sat in his study with coffee black, no sugar, and opened the ledger. It was a physical black notebook where we tracked everything. Not just money, but relationships. This was the most vital lesson he ever taught me. The economics of affection. "Most people think love is a feeling, Ashley," he told me when I was 16, circling a name in the book. They are wrong. Love is an active investment. It is the allocation of time, resources, and care with the expectation of mutual growth. If you pour equity into a person and they return nothing but deficits, that isn't family, that is a bad investment. We applied this logic to my biological parents. Over the years, Jason and Jennifer sent the occasional text, usually around holidays, usually generic. Happy birthday! Hope school is fun. Performative digital crumbs designed to assuage their own guilt. Robert would look at the texts over my shoulder. Low effort capital, he'd say. Spam. Delete it. So I did. I watched from a distance as Jessica and Chloe grew up online. They were beautiful, polished, and expensive. They went to party schools, majored in communications, and spent their 20s backpacking through Europe on my parents' credit cards. They were brand ambassadors for a lifestyle they hadn't earned. To Robert, they were depreciating assets. Pretty to look at, but losing value every day, they failed to build their own equity. I went the other way. I double majored in finance and contract law. I didn't party. I interned at Robert's firm. I started at the bottom, shredding paper, and worked my way up until I was sitting across from CEOs, negotiating buyouts. I hardened. I sharpened. I became the woman Robert needed me to be, not a daughter to be coddled, but a successor to be respected. By the time I was 28, I wasn't just living in the brutalist house. I was managing the estate. I knew where every dollar was buried. I knew the codes to the safes and the skeletons in the closets of half the city's elite. Robert never hugged me often. He never told me I was a princess. But the day I passed the bar exam, he poured me a glass of the vintage 1982 Cabernet and clinked his glass against mine. "You are solvent, Ashley," he said, which was the highest compliment he could give. "You don't need anyone, not even me." He was right. I had become a fortress, just like the house. I thought I was ready for anything, but I wasn't ready for the silence that would come next. I wasn't ready to lose the only investor who had ever bet on me. The end of an era didn't come with a bang. It came with a text message from Robert's personal physician at 4:12 a.m. He's gone. Massive stroke. It was instant. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone across the room. Grief is just bad data if you let it paralyze you. I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp, and opened the crisis management file on my laptop. Robert had prepared me for this. "Death is the ultimate breach of contract," he used to say. "The only way to win is to handle the logistics better than the grief." So I did. I arranged the cremation, notified the board of directors, and froze the accounts to prevent unauthorized access. By 8 a.m., I was dressed in a black sheath dress, standing in the foyer, waiting for the inevitable. The vultures didn't circle in the sky. They arrived in a convoy of rented luxury SUVs. My phone buzzed. The gate intercom. I watched the video feed from the security tablet. My mother, Jennifer, was leaning out of the driver's window, punching a code into the keypad. 1988. My birth year. The same code she had locked me out with 15 years ago. The light blinked red. I let her try 3 times. I watched her frustration mount, watched her perfect blowout frizz in the humidity. Only when she began to yell at the intercom did I press the button to open the gates. I didn't speak. I just let them in. They swept into the house like they were attending a gallery opening rather than a wake. My father, Jason, walked in first, not looking for me, but scanning the ceiling height of the foyer. "Concrete and steel," he muttered to Chloe. "We'll need to soften this immediately. Maybe some teak paneling." Jessica followed, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors. She walked straight past me to the wet bar and poured herself a drink without asking. "God, it's gloomy in here. Did Uncle Robert hate sunlight?" Then came my mother. She stopped in front of me, looking me up and down with that familiar mixture of pity and distaste. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer condolences. She looked at me like I was a squatter she was about to evict. "Well, Ashley," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "I suppose this is a difficult day for you. The ride had to end sometime." "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was steady. "Oh, we aren't worried about the schedule," she dismissed, waving a hand. "We need to do a walkthrough. Assess the inventory. Your father has some ideas for renovations before we list the property." I stared at her. Robert's ashes weren't even cold, and they were already flipping his house. "And regarding your living arrangements," she continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We're willing to give you a week to pack. We know you've gotten used to a certain lifestyle here. But now that the owner is gone, we can't have strays occupying prime real estate. You understand, don't you? It's just business. It's just business. I looked at Jason measuring the wall with his iPhone. I looked at Chloe taking selfies in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked at Jessica appraising the vintage Rolex on the side table. They thought I was the stray. They thought I was the liability. They had no idea that I was the one holding the keys to the vault. I understand perfectly, I said. We'll discuss everything at the reading. The reading? Jennifer laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, honey, don't get your hopes up. Blood always calls to blood. You were just a hobby. She patted my cheek a condescending tap and walked away to critique the kitchen cabinetry. I didn't wipe the spot where she touched me. I filed it away in the ledger. The debt was compounding by the second, and collection time was starting in exactly 1 hour. The reading took place in a conference room on the 40th floor of the Sterling & Associates building. The view was panoramic, the city laid out below like a circuit board. My family sat on one side of the mahogany table, vibrating with anticipation. I sat alone on the other side, my hands resting on the closed black notebook. Mr. Sterling entered. He was a man Robert trusted implicitly, sharp, efficient, and utterly devoid of patience for fools. He set a thick file on the table and adjusted his glasses. Let's begin, he said. My father, Jason, leaned forward, already mentally spending the money. We're ready. Let's get through the formalities. We have contractors coming to the estate at 4. Sterling ignored him. He opened the file. I will read the last will and testament of Robert James Mountain. To my charities, to my staff. He listed off minor bequests. My mother tapped her manicured nails on the table, impatient. Chloe was scrolling through a luxury car dealership's website under the table. Now, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. Regarding the primary estate, the real estate portfolio, including the primary residence, the art collection, the majority share in Mountain Capital, the tech stock portfolio, total estimated value, $50 million. The heir left the room. $50 million. It was more than they had guessed. My mother gripped my father's hand, her eyes wide with greed. Jessica let out a small, unladylike squeak. To my brother Jason and his wife Jennifer, Sterling read. They leaned in, hungry. I leave the reminder that blood is a biological accident, not a contract. You invested nothing in me in life. You will harvest nothing from me in death. The silence was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. To my nieces, Jessica and Chloe, Sterling continued, I leave the hope that you one day learn to build something of your own, rather than waiting for someone else to die so you can take theirs. My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He can. And he did, Sterling said calmly. He turned the page. To my daughter in spirit, Ashley, the one person who never asked me for a dime, but earned every cent. I leave the entirety of my estate, everything. It is yours, kid. Use it to build. No smile, no cheer, just observation. I watched them. This was the moment of narcissistic injury. They weren't grieving Robert. They weren't even grieving the loss of the money yet. They were grieving the loss of their fantasy, the delusion that they were the main characters of the universe. The will was a mirror, and for the first time, it didn't reflect their grandeur. It reflected their irrelevance. You witch! My mother screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You manipulated him. You poisoned him against his own family. You were just the charity case, the stray. I was never the stray. Mother, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. I was the only one paying attention. We'll sue! Jason roared, his face purple. Undue influence. Mental incompetence. We will tie this up in court for years. You won't see a penny. Sterling cleared his throat. It was a dry, dusty sound that stopped my father mid-shout. "Mr. Mountain, before you call your lawyers, there is one more addendum I must read. It concerns the summer reset cruise of 15 years ago." The color drained from my mother's face so fast she looked like a corpse. "What cruise?" Chloe asked, confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," I said. I opened my black notebook. "It has everything to do with the negative balance." Mr. Sterling opened the addendum file. It wasn't thin. It was a thick stack of documents, yellowed at the edges, dating back 15 years. "Your summer reset cruise," Sterling began, his voice dry as dust. "The one where you locked a 13-year-old girl out of her home. It was quite expensive, wasn't it? First-class flights, private yacht charters, champagne." "That is irrelevant," Jason shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "That was a gift. Robert paid for that trip." "He paid for it," Sterling corrected. "But it wasn't a gift, it was a loan." He slid a document across the table. I recognized it immediately. It was a promissory note, signed by both Jason and Jennifer Mountain. "You borrowed $150,000 to fund that summer," Sterling said. "And over the last 15 years, you have continued to borrow against the estate, the cars, the renovations, Chloe's violin conservatory, Jessica's pageant fees. You financed your entire perfect life on Robert's credit. He said he would take care of it." Jennifer shrieked. "He said it would come out of our share." "Correct," Sterling said. "Clause 4, Section B. All principal and accrued interest shall be deducted from the borrower's portion of the lender's estate upon his death." The room went dead silent. Chloe looked between her parents, her face pale. "What does that mean?" "Dad?" I spoke up. My voice was calm, cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "It means, Chloe, that they bet against the house and lost. The clause says the debt is deducted from the inheritance. But since your inheritance is zero," Sterling finished the sentence, "the debt is not forgiven. It is callable. Immediately." He turned the page to the final calculation. "Principal plus 15 years of compound interest. You don't just walk away with nothing, Mr. and Mrs. Mountain. You owe the estate $2,400,000. "We don't have that," Jason whispered. The fight had left him. He slumped into his chair, a man whose entire identity, wealth, status, success had just been revealed as a hollow shell. We leveraged the house. We have nothing. Then you are insolvent," Sterling said, closing the file. "The estate will move to liquidate your assets to recover the debt. The house, the cars, the accounts." Jessica stood up, trembling. "My condo?" "Dad, you co-signed my condo." "Seized," I said. "It's collateral." "But that's mine!" she screamed at me. "You can't take my home." "You took mine," I replied. "You took my home when I was 13. You took my peace. You took my parents. Now, the ledger is balancing itself." My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. She realized, finally, that this wasn't just about money. It was about exposure. Everyone would know. The country club, the neighbors, their Instagram followers. They weren't the Golden family. They were frauds who had been living on charity for decades. "Ashley," she whimpered, reaching across the table. "Please, we're family." I looked at her hand, the same hand that had written, "Back in a week," on a sticky note. "No," I said. "Family is an asset. You are a liability. Please, Ashley." The words came out of my mother's mouth like broken glass. She reached for me again, her hands trembling, the diamonds on her fingers shaking diamonds that, technically, now belong to me. "We can fix this. We're your parents. You can't just let us lose everything." I looked at them. Really looked at them. For years, I had seen them as giants, monoliths of perfection that I could never scale. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room, they just looked small. Insolvency does that to people. It shrinks them. I opened the black notebook one last time. I ran my finger down the columns. Decades of red ink. I've reviewed the accounts, I said softly. The room went silent to hear me. And I've run the projections. There is no return on investment here. You aren't family. You are liabilities. And this estate does not carry dead weight. I closed the book. The sound was final, like a gavel strike. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Proceed with collections. Seize the assets. Liquidate everything. Ashley, my father cried out, a guttural sound of ruin. Where will we go? I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. Backward glances are for people with regrets. I had none. I suggest you try the library, I said, walking to the door. Or a friend's. I hear the humidity is terrible this time of year. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt efficient. The ledger was balanced. The drive back to the estate was quiet. When I pulled up to the gate, I didn't punch in the old code. I pulled out my phone and reprogrammed the system. I deleted 1,988. I typed in a new sequence the date Robert took me in. The light blinked green. Access granted. I walked into the house, my house. The brutalist concrete walls didn't feel cold anymore. They felt like armor. They felt safe. I went to the wine cellar and pulled out the bottle of 1982 Cabernet. I poured a single glass and walked out onto the terrace overlooking the cliffs. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and gold. I took a sip. It tasted like iron and earth and victory. I wasn't lonely. I was solitary. There is a difference. One is a state of lack. The other is a state of wholeness. I realized then that the $50 million wasn't the real inheritance. The money was just a tool. The real inheritance was the ability to stand on my own 2 feet, to look at the people who had hurt me, and to feel absolutely nothing. I was no longer the girl crying on the porch with $12 in her pocket. I was the owner of the house. And the gate was closed. If you've ever had to cut off toxic family to save your own future, share this video. You aren't alone.